Hello everyone. A special heartfelt thanks to everyone who supported us with liking, commenting, and subscribing. Your support is what motivates us to continue and provide the best. We promise you more great content, so stay tuned. On one dark autumn night, when the stars were hidden behind thick clouds, a car slowly stopped in front of the gates of an abandoned mansion. The mansion stood tall in the darkness, imposing, as if it had returned from the Middle Ages. Its cracked walls and crumbling towers spoke of centuries of isolation, mystery, and neglect. The place emitted a strange sense of fear, as if the surrounding darkness concealed terrifying secrets. Inside the car, a group of friends laughed and exchanged jokes. They were excited to attend a costume party at this old place, unaware of the nightmares the mansion held for them, nightmares far worse than anything they could imagine. As they prepared to enter, none of them knew that this night would not be an ordinary party, but a horrifying experience where fun would turn into a fight for survival. The car's wheels rolled over the crumbling gravel, the sound echoing in the chilly air. Then the door opened, revealing a group of friends, each wearing an elaborate costume. A grand masquerade awaited them. Their excited laughter and jokes eased the tension at first, but they had no idea that this mansion was more than just an old building. They walked through the narrow, damp-smelling hallways, their footsteps blending with the faint echo of unseen whispers. They carried bottles of wine and snacks, filling the place with a festive atmosphere that didn't last long. But when they reached the grand hall, where fallen chandeliers hung and dusty furniture lay scattered, the unexpected happened. Suddenly, a cold wind blew out the party lights, and darkness engulfed the room completely. At that moment, the friends heard a faint sound, like a mysterious hum emanating from every corner of the hall. Ancient echoes, as if from a distant time, began to ring in each of their ears. They felt something strange surrounding them, as if they were about to step into another world. Then, as if the mansion had been waiting, the costumes they wore began to move on their own. The joyful knight's armor transformed into a blood-soaked shield, and the old witch's garments wrinkled as if they were trying to peel off her body. In a moment of silence, the costumes became living creatures with evil gazes and frightening movements. One of the friends, who wore a terrifying vampire costume, turned to find himself face to face with a more vicious version of his costume, the real fangs dripping with blood. He had no time to scream before the fangs sank into his neck, leaving him bleeding profusely. The terrified screams filled the place, and the laughter that had once echoed through the hall turned into cries of brutal pain. The friends tried to escape, but they found only more traps and monsters waiting for them. The mansion wove a web of horror around them, and every attempt to escape was met with more cruelty and blood. One of the friends, Mark, tried to escape from the main hall, stumbling in the darkness. He wore a knight's costume, but he soon realized that his armor had become unbearably heavy. He felt the blood-stained iron wrapping around his body, crushing him mercilessly until he collapsed on the floor, gasping his last breaths in agony. In another corner of the hall, Layla, who was dressed as a witch, also tried to escape. She carefully felt her way, But suddenly, she felt her foot sink into the cracked floor. She had fallen into a hidden trap, a small hole sealed by rotting floorboards, but the moment her foot touched it, sharp spikes burst through, impaling her leg. The piercing scream she let out echoed through the mansion's walls, but its sound faded away without anyone there to save her. Jack, dressed as a werewolf, tried to use his strength and courage to guide the friends toward an exit. But he soon discovered that the claws of his costume had become real, digging into his flesh every time he moved. He saw a shadow approaching, sensing danger. But when he tried to attack, he found himself facing a distorted version of his costume, a more savage and bloodthirsty werewolf creature. A battle ensued between them, but there was no chance of survival. As they fell one by one, Frank, dressed as a ghost, discovered a hidden passage behind a dusty bookshelf. He tried to gather the remaining friends, but it was too late. The monsters circling around them were nothing but manifestations of their worst nightmares, and the mansion knew exactly how to prey on their fears with terrifying precision. As the end drew near, the mansion grew more savage. The walls twisted around the friends like a living prison, and the horrifying sounds intensified, as if they came from the depths of hell. Frank moved cautiously through the secret passage, trying to keep his calm, but he felt a strange coldness in the air, as though death itself was breathing down his neck. Suddenly, the floor beneath him began to shake, and deep cracks appeared, from which ghostly hands covered in decaying flesh emerged, reaching out to grab him. He barely managed to pull himself free, but then he heard a familiar voice behind him. Slowly turning around, he found his friends, who had fallen one by one, had come back to life, but they were no longer themselves. Their bodies were twisted, their eyes hollow and white, and they walked toward him slowly, whispering in eerie voices, "Come with us, it's the only way out." In sheer terror, Frank ran down the narrow corridor until he reached a dark room filled with old mirrors. For a moment, he thought he had found a way to escape, but when he looked into the mirrors, he didn't see his reflection. Instead, he saw bloody scenes of his friends being brutally tortured inside the mansion. He watched as each of them relived an endless nightmare. Mark trapped inside his armor as it crushed his bones, Layla being dragged underground by spikes piercing her body, and Jack battling the savage werewolf creature that was ripping him apart. As Frank stared at the horror reflected in the mirrors, the figures began to move, stepping out from the glass. Twisted creatures, their rotting flesh falling to the ground, advanced toward him. He tried to back away, but they surrounded him from every side. Their dead eyes widened, and their voices spoke in a demonic tone. "The mansion doesn't let anyone leave." At that moment, the entire mansion shook, and the walls began to collapse slowly. The floor beneath Frank's feet cracked open, and flames shot up from below, burning everything in their path. Frank realized he was trapped with no escape as the flames devoured the walls of the mansion, and the echoes of his friends' screams filled every corner. Frank felt the end drawing near. The floor crumbled beneath him, and the twisted creatures that had emerged from the mirrors approached him. Their dead eyes locked on him as if they were tightening their grip on his soul. In a moment of pure panic, Frank decided to face his fate instead of running. He charged toward the largest mirror in the room, trying to destroy it. But the moment he struck it with all his might, the mirror shattered into tiny shards, and from it burst a mysterious light that engulfed the entire room. Frank suddenly found himself surrounded by total darkness. No sounds, no screams, just a heavy, terrifying silence. He felt as if he were suspended between two worlds. Then, the voices returned, but this time they came from within him. "You are now part of the mansion. You will never leave." At that moment, Frank realized the horrifying truth. The mansion wasn't just a building. It was a living entity that fed on the souls of those who entered. And now he was trapped forever within its walls, just like his friends, who had been twisted into ghostly forms. In the end, the flames died down, and the mansion returned to its eerie, silent state, waiting for its next victims. Frank and his friends became part of the darkness, watching, waiting for new visitors to continue the endless cycle of terror.